When Nelson Mandela was released in 1990 after 27 years of political imprisonment, the world thought we had removed the chains restricting Black economic prosperity in the largest economy in Africa. We now know that Black economic prosperity in South Africa is heavily tied not solely to the political structure that separated the races, but also is strongly dependent upon such elements as economic empowerment policies, corporate pioneering, and perpetuating the habits and behaviors compatible with abundance. I'm an expert on perpetuating values and behaviors through story via my extensive research on Black family heritage books. These books heroize ancestors' development through tribulation and triumph, propelling future generations to indwell self-identities that enable substantive legacies. To better understand how South Africa's economy is ripening as an investment opportunity for African Americans, we'll explore here 5 key points. The fall of apartheid, including the country's economic infrastructure plan, the change in the South African economy from 1990 to the present, several major players who lead the business landscape in billion-dollar scaling up, key sources for U.S. investment advice and implementation, and Black genealogy books' role in shaping intergenerational values and behaviors conducive to economic success. So first, the fall of apartheid. South Africa to end apartheid or be cut off from global trade, we put enough teeth behind that call and were at it for a long enough time that apartheid did indeed fall. It started back in 1948, following the electoral victory of the white-ruled National Party. The first global movement against apartheid's racial segregation regime came 11 years later, in 1959, with a UK-led boycott. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, the anti-apartheid movement evolved into a massive global effort. It was driven by student uprisings, cultural boycotts, and international economic sanctions, with the US Black population playing leading roles. Apartheid officially ended in 1994 after a series of negotiated settlements, following the repeal of apartheid legislation and amid Mandela's election as the country's first Black president. The Black Economic Empowerment Program was adopted in 1994 and later adapted to the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Program, or BBEE, as the primary vehicle for Black participation and significant growth in South African investment and intergenerational wealth creation. Under BBEE trusts, shares of companies are held on behalf of a specific individual, family, or community. What Black South Africans wanted for themselves and what we, the world, wanted for them was a solid place in their nation's economy. So next, we'll take a look at some highlights of South Africa's economy and Black people's place in it in 1990 compared with the present. In 1990, South Africa ranked 27th among world economies with a $116 billion GDP compared with the US's number one world economy of 5.96 trillion. South Africa was in 1990 and remains today the largest economy on the African continent. We can see that the total population between 1990 and 2025 grew by 68%, up to 63 million. And the percentage of Black South Africans grew slightly from 76% to 82%, and the raw number grew by 80% up to 52 million. The nominal GDP, again at 116 billion in 1990, was up more than 200% by 2025 to 372 billion. A measure of Black well-being, the life expectancy at birth, grew slightly to 64 and a half years from 62 years. And another measure of Black economic well-being, the unemployment rate, drastically to 35%, which is up 54%. And while in 1990, Black South Africans owned less than 1% of national wealth, by 2025, ownership had increased, but still was less than 5% of the wealth of a typical white household. Delving further into the changes between 1990 and 2025, we see that top earners included practically no Black South Africans in 1990, and in 2025, Black South Africans composed 41% of the country's highest income bracket. Also, in 1990, Black South Africans earned a negligible amount of equity, and by 2025, they earned about 7% of the South African held assets on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. In terms of real estate, again, in 1990, ownership was negligible. And by 2025, while ownership is growing substantially, it is very illiquid. And in terms of the lower income level people, they were restricted to low-wage labor in 1990, and they're heavily sustained by government grants and public transfers in 2025. In terms of changes in the economy's major sectors over time, we see that manufacturing was the largest economy sector back in 1990, accounting for about a quarter of the economy. And by 2025, that had decreased to about 12%. There was a similar flip in the role of finance, real estate, and business services in the economy, accounting for about a quarter of the economy in 2025, up from about 12% in 1990. Personal services, including government contracts, accounted for about 17% of the South African economy in 2025. Trade, catering, and accommodations, which includes travel was basically the same at about 13–14%. And transport, storage, and communication grew to one of the top 5 sectors in the South African economy by 2025. And that includes the infrastructure for information flow. Despite its relatively impressive economic growth and sector shifting, South Africa faces challenges in its economic performance. To point out just a few of these challenges, we see here that while GDP and GDP adjusted for the cost of living rank the economy 38th and 33rd globally, per capita GDP, both raw and adjusted for the cost of living, ranks it at 107th in the world. As the World Bank puts it, this performance proves that aggregate national wealth does not translate into individual prosperity here. Also, real GDP is growing more slowly than in other parts of the continent. And again, the unemployment rate is high at about 1/3 of the eligible workers, one of the highest in the world. One of South Africa's biggest economic challenges is immigration. This issue was in the news a great deal in June 2026, including with residents calling for illegal immigrants to exit the country by a June 30th deadline. Another impediment to Black South Africans' full economic development is low rates of educating natives to do the work required in a developing economy. About 47% of South African adults do not have the equivalent of a high school diploma. Amid world and national efforts to set South Africa on a path to countrywide intergenerational wealth building, and despite global and country-specific challenges to its growth, South Africa boasts hundreds of companies and principals who are scaling commerce to billion-dollar levels. So next, I highlight several of these big players, noting that Business Insider Africa reports that the top 10% of Black wealth holders in South Africa own more than 80% of the Black wealth, compared with the top 10% of Black wealth holders in the United States owning about 67% of Black wealth. One company that has excelled in scaling to billion-dollar levels is African Rainbow Minerals. This company is a leader in diversified mining and minerals. It's one of the most prominent entities listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the JSE, and it acts as a pillar of South Africa's foundational mining economy. The company was founded by Patrice Motsepe, who in 2008 became South Africa's first Black billionaire. He continues to serve as the company's executive chairman, and his current net worth is estimated at approximately $4 billion, according to Forbes Africa. The company maintains its status as a premier Black-controlled entity through the substantial shareholding of Motsepe's family investment vehicles alongside BBEE community trusts. Exxaro Resources is another of the largest Black companies based in South Africa. Because it's a principal supplier of thermal coal to the national power utility, Exxaro holds a highly strategic role in ensuring the country's grid stability and its national energy security. Its growth is heavily shaped by its former iconic CEO, Sifo Nkosi. Today, the company is led by Mombasa Tsengwa as its chief executive officer. Again, the company's majority Black-owned status is permanently secured via an empowerment capital structure that unites institutional Black investors, communities, and employee share ownership strategies. Stone Investment Corporation is one of South Africa's most successful and enduring investment firms, listed on the JSE. It's been operating for 3 decades, bridging capital markets and Black capital. It employs a long-term investment strategy, taking significant equity stakes in a diverse portfolio. Holdings span food production and fishing, healthcare, real estate, and financial services. While its shares are widely held by institutional and retail investors, control and voting power remain heavily weighted toward the original founders and a Black-led empowerment consortium. The company was co-founded by prominent South African entrepreneurs Mustak Bray and Fred Robertson, who remind us that colored is another major racial category in South Africa that we Westerners often lump in with Black people. Tebe Investment Corp, founded in 1992 at the dawn of South Africa's democracy, is the country's pioneer Black-owned investment company. It was established with the explicit mandate to build community wealth across the historically excluded populations. The company manages an expansive portfolio of investments in critical economy sectors, such as petrochemicals, renewable energy, financial services, media, and agricultural logistics. It acts as a primary equity partner for multinationals entering the Southern Africa economy. Mandela and Walter Sisulu are among the founders of this privately held company. An empowerment community trust holds the assets, ensuring that a significant portion of the company's dividends directly fund community development, education, and social uplift programs across the nation. Shoe and apparel king Batu is the undisputed leader of South Africa's modern Black-owned retail and manufacturing surge. This consumer goods giant is proving that local Black brands can scale exponentially to take their place in the international fashion industry. Founded by CEO Theo Balawi, Batu is privately held and 100% Black-owned. Again, ownership is concentrated among its founder and early-stage local partners, with an eye toward ensuring the brand retains its authentic roots and direct local economic impact. Beleng Bonolo Healthcare Group is another Black-owned and managed company worth mentioning. It is a privately held healthcare company founded by Jackie Rampidi in 2006. Its vision is to provide a formidable healthcare network of accessible, world-class medical services in historically disadvantaged communities. Among the company's holdings is Botshuli Private Hospital, which is a 100-bed unit opened in 2014 and named for Rampede's mother. Afrocentric Group is an investment holding company listed on the JSE. This group owns and operates diverse healthcare-related enterprises throughout Southern Africa. It provides medical administration and delivers healthcare products and services to the public and private healthcare sectors. A white-owned company, Sanlam, as of 2023, holds a 60% controlling stake in Afrocentric. Because Sanlam is a level 1 BBBEE contributor, its controlling ownership in a once 100% Black-owned company generates both positive capital outcomes for the Black stakeholders and ongoing debates about just how intergenerational South Africa's Black wealth will be as ownership diffuses. As founding CEO of Harith General Partners, operating out of Johannesburg, and one of the originators of the $630 million Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund, Seppo Maloele is one of the wealthiest people in South Africa. After getting his first taste of entrepreneurship as a young boy, the billionaire businessman and philanthropist now has worked in private equity for more than 2 decades. Daily Investor, the leading South African financial news publication, intensely covers the billion-dollar scalers and other business news relevant to people considering investing in the South African market, as well as those already invested in it. An ongoing story in the Daily Investor these days is covering the JSE's plans to revive, including by boosting incentives for companies to list and moving to 24-hour trading. In addition to the Daily Investor serving as an information resource for people interested in capitalizing on South African business development, other resources also are available, including those that cater specifically to American markets. So next, we'll take a look at U.S. investment advice via some of the major providers thereof for those interested in the South African equity market. Ariel Investments is the key player in this realm. John W. Rogers Jr. and Melody Hobson founded the company in 1983, and it now manages portfolios of stocks and other publicly traded financial instruments worth approximately $14 billion. It was the first Black-owned mutual fund firm in the United States. It targets undervalued, high-quality global equities, utilizing its specialized strategy to allow U.S. institutional and retail capital to grow in emerging markets. It has a niche market in large cap municipals operating heavily in South Africa. Robert F. Smith's Vista Equity Partners is another key U.S. source for South African investment advice. Operated by the man touted as the wealthiest African American, this firm manages a portfolio of direct business ownership and private equity stakes valued at more than $100 billion. Smith founded Vista Equity Partners to focus strictly on enterprise software, data, and technology-enabled companies. The firm historically boasts a massive 30% rate of return. While primarily US-focused, Vista's massive portfolio includes companies in South Africa's dominant tech ecosystems in Silicon Cape and Johannesburg. African Diaspora Network is a Silicon Valley-based nonprofit that mobilizes the financial, intellectual, and social capital of African diasporans and their descendants. It connects entrepreneurs, investors, and philanthropists in order to foster sustainable development in Africa and uplift Black communities globally. It notes that South Africa presents a highly visible and natural target for this investment, with exports including fashion, fine art, and interior design showing up on international runways and in luxury boutiques. The network additionally notes that South Africa's Amapiano music dominates global charts, the country's digital infrastructure is robust, and its entrepreneurial class is hungry for access to global markets. The network advises people on how to spend money in South Africa, specifically to empower Black people. It says, quote, "The face of a brand does not always reflect the people who hold the equity behind the scenes. Capital has a very long memory. The formal South African economy remains heavily stratified. Wealth, land, and means of production are still largely concentrated in historic white-owned monopolies," unquote. The network helps consumers and investors put money into the hands of their choice. U.S. investment advisors work closely with investment firms on the ground in African markets, such as Old Mutual Limited. This partially Black-owned firm focuses on identifying companies with high levels of Black ownership and management. It assesses the impact on Black wealth, not just based on percent ownership, but also based on the fine print of the BBBEE trust investments. While investment advisors guide us on specific financial strategies, our family networks are where we discuss, exemplify, and thus teach and learn the underlying behaviors of entrepreneurship and financial security building. So, to end our presentation today, we'll take a look at how traits that undergird economic thriving are shared in South African Black genealogies. Black genealogy books about South African families are a rich niche within the Black family heritage books genre. Growing from the nation's oral tradition, these books chronicle changes in Black family life from apartheid days to publication date. They explain the development of family attitudes, values, and behaviors from traditional to modern that include calculated risk management, decision-making, optimism, resilience, team effectiveness, and self-awareness and identity. South African Black family heritage books are published in just as wide a range of formats as are US-based Black family heritage books. They are traditional genealogy and family history books. They're memoirs, biographies, and reality-based novels. They are by both family members and outside researchers, from famous to obscure, and they emerge from both independent and commercial publishers. South African Black family heritage books range from heavy on apartheid oppression stories to light, and they twang the ancestral tales such that forebears' heroism clearly burst forth on the pages. The essential South African Black family heritage book is a memoir by one of Nelson Mandela's grandsons. Going to the Mountain, Life Lessons from My Grandfather, Nelson Mandela, centers the family's role in the country's major struggles and triumphs. Published in 2018 by Penguin Random House, the Penguin Random House imprint Hutchison in London, the book in 258 pages chronicles the aftermath of Mandela's 1990 release as a political prisoner through the eyes of the author. This grandson was reared by Mandela to thrive in the post-apartheid South Africa that Mandela both helped to make possible and served as its first Black president. The book's title hints at native strains in incorporating age-old traditions, in this case, manhood circumcision, into a robust and modern economic future. Going to the Mountain is the term for adult male ritual circumcision in Mandela's culture. Land of My Ancestors by Botali Tima is an epic 280-page trade paperback South African family history published in 2019 by Penguin. While working on the UNESCO slave route project in the early 2000s, Tima learned that her family originated with two young men who had been child slaves in the mid-1800s. Previously published as The People of Welgavon, the book tells the young men's intergenerational story through slavery, colonialism, the Boer War, and apartheid. In a television interview about her family's attitudes and behaviors, Tima says, "I want to see you look at how these people reinvented themselves. Because what they did was, first of all, they became very strong farmers. And secondly, they took on education as an important means of being, of creating a new image for themselves. I've got it there. You can't be beaten by life. So that is why the attitude is not bitter. My grandparents didn't pass on bitterness to me. They passed on the idea that you are responsible for your destiny." In 1987, when Mark Metabane reunited with his grandmother, mother, and sister, a reunion Oprah Winfrey helped make possible, and 9 years after he had left South Africa for the United States, he learned shocking and inspirational stories about his family members' lives. These stories mirrored the lives of millions of Black South African women and families. So, in 1994, HarperCollins published his 366-page Black family heritage book. In African Women, Three Generations, Metabane builds on his authorship of several related books, including Kafir Boy, a novel about his coming of age under apartheid, and Love in Black and White, the story he wrote with his wife about their interracial marriage. In this family heritage book, the author centers the sagas of Granny, his grandmother, Gelly, his mother, and Flora, his sister, in the urban township of Alexandra. The book shows how apartheid shaped their daily survival, family structures, and the passing on of resilience from mother to daughter. Born a Crime is a 2016 Black family heritage book by international celebrity comedian and talk show host Trevor Noah. In memoir form, with a version adapted for youth, the book centers the author's maternal Xhosa lineage in South Africa. Published by One World and containing 304 pages, the book captures struggles, triumphs, and unbreakable bonds of a Black South African family. Noah's path from apartheid in South Africa to the desk of The Daily Show began with a criminal act, his birth. He was born to a white Swiss father and a Black Xhosa mother, at a time when such a union was punishable by 5 years in prison. Living proof of his parents' indiscretion, Noah was kept mostly indoors for the earliest years of his life, bound by the extreme and often absurd measures his mother took to hide him from a government that could at any moment steal him away. Read how, finally liberated by the fall of South Africa's tyrannical white rule, Noah and his mother started to live openly and freely, embracing the opportunities won by the worldwide anti-apartheid struggle. Drawing on her own family experiences, C.A. Davids wrote The Blacks of Cape Town as a reality-based novel. Published in South Africa in 2014 by Mojaji Books, this 242-page family story follows a mixed-race South African man who changed his last name to Black, lived as white, and looms in the psyche of his colored descendants. The book links main character Zara's life in America to the historical choices of her ancestors in South Africa. The book thereby is an intergenerational excavation that shows an uplifting legacy of survival, continuity, and resourcefulness. It demonstrates that a family's complicated history can be faced, understood, and ultimately integrated into positive identities across extended family members. Seed is Mine, the life of Cas Main, a South African sharecropper, 1894 to 1985, is a Black family heritage book by Charles Van Onselen, who is an acclaimed South African social historian, not a member of the family explored in the book. Hill and Wang published this 649-page tome in 1996 to an audience eager for sober details of a Black family's life under the newly felled apartheid. The book traces the multi-generational lineage of Maine, a resilient patriarch, and his sprawling family. Via interiority, it captures harsh realities of rural sharecropping on the high road. It tracks how the family's descendants navigated migrations between isolated farmlands and growing segregated urban centers. For the quality of the historical research in this book, Van Onselen won the 1997 Alan Payton Award. Scatterlings by Rezoketswe Martha Menenza is a historical fiction Black family heritage book set against the backdrop of South Africa's 1927 Immorality Act, the act which criminalized interracial relationships. Published in 2022 by Harper Via, this 288-page story centers on a family headed by a white father and a Black Jamaican-born mother. Alyssa, who is both Jamaican and a descendant of slaves, was adopted and reared by a wealthy white British couple in Jamaica. When she realizes she is not immune to British society prejudices, she goes to South Africa, where she meets and marries Abram. In the aftermath of the Immorality Act, she comes to a heartbreaking conclusion based on her family history, and she commits a devastating act that reverberates through the family's generations. As a work of historical fiction, Scatterling serves as a powerful blueprint for ancestral healing. It illustrates how directly confronting historical trauma can foster a family's psychological resilience and break cycles of generational poverty. And finally, The Inheritors, an intimate portrait of South Africa's racial reckoning by E. Fairbanks, is a conservative American political journalist's, not a family member's, narrative of 3 South Africans over 5 decades of family history. Set amid socio-political upheavals from apartheid to the born-free generation, this 416-page book was published in 2022 by Simon & Schuster. It won the 2023 Penn John Kenneth Galbraith Award for Nonfiction. Fairbanks says those who grew up under apartheid and experienced its final stages reared a born-free generation of pessimists sprinkled with optimists, while South African teenagers of the 1980s expected to live out their lives under apartheid. The 1984 collapse of the world's last explicitly racial segregationist regime is giving way to an economy for which they are not yet prepared. So in conclusion, South Africa, as Africa's largest economy, is an investment opportunity for African Americans. It is so for a variety of reasons. One reason is that many Black South Africans who defeated apartheid and their descendants are on a mission to create intergenerational economic well-being. Another reason is that the growth in South Africa's economy between 1990 and 2025 has shifted key sectors in accordance with growth prospects. A third reason South Africa is an investment opportunity for African Americans is that despite high immigration, low education rates, and other challenges to the economy, by scaling to billion-dollar levels, Black-owned South African companies are lifting their owners, some workers, and some owner and key worker family members to significant wealth. Also, South African sources of information, such as the Daily Investor and US-based investment companies such as Ariel Investments and Vista Equity Partners, provide guidance on availing oneself of South African investment opportunities. And the fifth reason here covered that South Africa is an investment opportunity for African Americans is that the people of the country as chronicled in their family heritage books, are finding their way to productive roles in the country's economic development. They are finding and explaining their family's place by doing what other Black families across the diasporas do in books. That is, they are developing positive ancestral self-identities by heroizing ancestors, interpreting ancestors and their own actions, including in aiding the fall of apartheid through that hero lens, and claiming South Africa as their home of, by, and for ancestral legacy. They find ways to share and honor ancestral values identified in themselves, thus developing positive ancestral self-identity. Beyond what I've touched upon here, there are so many more elements that factor into the notion of South Africa as an investment opportunity for African Americans. Some of the other important issues are travel, both logistically to consider investments and as an investment sector. The idea of newly wealthy Black people asking the South African government to reduce their high taxes used to support massive aid to the poor and instead let the wealth builders support their own extended family members with that money. Black people's investment attitudes, habits, and securities training here in the United States, illegal immigration's impact, and the impact of an array of other issues, all of which can be explored via the growing body of online information. I've provided some links for further exploration, and key online sources include the South African Black Family Heritage Books showcased at the hbcuheritagehome.com.